I was mid-call with the Emergency Operations Center when my console flatlined. Not the internet. Not the power. The entire 911 emergency response relay I oversee for half the county went dark for 7 straight minutes. 7 minutes in my line of work could mean a grandmother dying in a house fire or a car crash victim bleeding out waiting for a signal that never gets through. I bolted out of my chair and ran diagnostics faster than most people can order coffee. The cause? A missing Wi-Fi booster. One of my privately owned backups that bridges the emergency signal into our rural edge zone. I had it installed on my property, locked in a utility shed with steel hinges and an encrypted padlock. But someone had taken it. Not disconnected or powered off, physically gone. And right there in the camera footage, plain as day, was Karen Holloway from the HOA, carrying it under her arm like a sack of dinner rolls. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. This woman once argued that solar panels disrupted the neighborhood's natural skyline harmony. Now she had somehow decided my Wi-Fi booster belonged to her. But I couldn't react emotionally. As a 9/11 network coordinator, my job is to stay calm when the world burns. So I took a breath, rewound the footage, and confirmed it. It was her. The ridiculous sun hat, the bright orange Crocs, the laminated HOA badge clipped to her windbreaker. Karen had upgraded from nuisance to national liability. I already knew her ego was bigger than her understanding of technology, but this was a new level of stupid. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA clubhouse acting like nothing had happened. Karen was sipping iced green tea and bragging about her newest idea, an HOA-wide mesh network so the board could monitor bandwidth equity in the community. She called it a shared internet vision, and even floated the idea of monthly Wi-Fi dues. I stood in the back corner, silently taking notes, pretending to text while watching her parade around with tech jargon she clearly didn't understand. When someone asked how she was getting such strong signal these days, she said she found a booster, just lying around near a trash pile behind someone's shed, and figured it had been abandoned. I wanted to drag her to court right then and there. But no. That would be too easy. Too fast. She thought she was being clever. She didn't know that by stealing my booster, she had tapped into an encrypted branch of the 911 emergency relay system, which meant that any data flowing through her unauthorized setup could now be traced, monitored, and flagged, forensic-grade evidence gathering at its finest. And Karen, for all her loudmouth antics, had unknowingly created the best honey trap I could ask for. That night, I logged into the county emergency node and triggered a test ping through the booster's old MAC address. Instead of a dead return, it bounced back from a router ID labeled KarenNet. She hadn't just plugged it in. She had actively installed it into her home network and renamed it after herself. The arrogance was almost artistic. I ran a light packet trace. What I saw next made my jaw tighten. KarenNet was actively routing pings through the booster and passing them into open traffic. That included pings from law enforcement, fire dispatch, and 2 rural medical facilities still linked to the legacy system I managed as backup. All of it was now bouncing through Karen's kitchen. I knew I had to act fast, but not rashly. I needed more than suspicion. I needed documentation. So the next morning, I stopped by her house under the pretense of returning a misplaced HOA newsletter. She invited me in, ever the smug gatekeeper of neighborhood order, and offered me a seat at her breakfast bar, right next to a blinking black and blue device mounted on her wall. My booster. Now labeled with a sticky note that read, "Property of HOA." My eyebrow twitched. She proudly launched into a speech about how her new tech was helping the community and how people were even asking her to help set up their smart sprinklers. I asked her casually if she had any cybersecurity installed. She waved me off, saying she read an article on Facebook about how hackers only target rich people and government sites. I sipped my water and smiled. She had no idea she had just turned her house into an open server for sensitive government traffic. 2 hours later, I filed a Level 2 anomaly report to the county's IT division, marking the node as compromised. I masked my identity to keep it from becoming a political scandal. Karen would throw a fit if she suspected I was involved. But the wheels were now in motion. All I had to do was keep her talking. At the next HOA event, a community digital access night, hosted by Karen herself, she stood in front of 20 neighbors and showed off her signal expander setup, pointing to a flowchart that included my booster and something she called neighborhood signal tunnels. She claimed the whole block could now access higher speeds thanks to her smart integration of scavenge tech. I recorded every word. What she didn't realize was that her little experiment had already caused 2 missed emergency calls and 1 false reroute. A local EMT reported getting a location signal 5 blocks away from the caller. When I traced it, it turned out to have bounced through KarenNet. If someone had died because of it, she wouldn't just be in trouble. She'd be facing federal charges. By the time she handed out flyers for her paid Wi-Fi optimization service, I had more than enough to proceed. But still, I waited. I wanted her to feel comfortable. I wanted her to build her little empire on a pile of illegal hardware and half-baked tech dreams. Because when it all came crashing down, I wanted every neighbor who believed in her nonsense to watch her get dragged out with a blinking booster in her purse and a network audit report as long as a CVS receipt. And it was coming sooner than she thought. Because just before midnight, I triggered another signal trace. Karen had added a second booster, this one sourced from county storm shelter inventory. She was expanding, which meant I wasn't just dealing with a petty thief. I was dealing with a full-blown tech terrorist in a sweater vest. Karen's obsession with power wasn't new, but now it had evolved beyond HOA gossip and parking complaints. She was genuinely treating stolen emergency communications equipment like it was a Pinterest DIY project. What rattled me wasn't just her ignorance. It was the fact that she had no idea the magnitude of the risk she had created. Her booster setup wasn't just siphoning Wi-Fi anymore. It was rerouting encrypted 911 signals through her open and unsecured home network, broadcasting sensitive emergency data into the digital wilderness. If someone with even a basic packet sniffer got access to her setup, they could track ambulances, eavesdrop on distress calls, or worse, fake emergency signals. It wasn't just dangerous. It was catastrophic. But I couldn't just shut it down. If I did, she'd scream sabotage, cry victim, and somehow spin it into a reason to ban satellite dishes or make everyone in the community go through an internet purity screening. Karen never backed down gracefully. No, I needed evidence. Public, undeniable, humiliating evidence. The next Friday evening, Karen hosted what she called Wine and Wi-Fi, an HOA event where she taught neighbors about digital democratization, a phrase she clearly found on a TED Talk thumbnail. I showed up with a hidden signal monitor app running on my phone and a packet logger in my pocket. The living room was packed with lawn chair politics and wine-drunk retirees, all nodding along as Karen pointed to a whiteboard covered in barely legible flowcharts. In between ramblings about community bandwidth, she waved toward the corner of the room where my booster stood, now wrapped in pink duct tape and topped with a plastic flamingo. I didn't even blink. I simply watched the signal strength on my phone spike. During her lecture, she encouraged people to donate old routers and boosters so she could build a neighborhood-wide mesh net. I nearly choked on my lukewarm soda when one elderly neighbor pulled out a modem from 2004 and asked if it would work with KarenNet. She assured them it would, claiming she had integrated retro protocols. The technical word salad was painful to listen to, but the room was eating it up. Karen was feeding their confusion with false confidence, and they were thanking her for it. But I wasn't here to correct her. I was here to document everything. After the session, I lingered, making small talk while scanning the signal logger. As expected, her network was broadcasting in open mode. Worse, I spotted pings from 2 hospital devices. She had no idea that those tiny pulses were dispatch confirmations from emergency transport systems. By running them through her home booster, She had turned a protected government link into a public access point. Anyone could interfere, delay, or spoof responses. It was like putting a police scanner next to a karaoke machine and thinking nothing bad could happen. The next morning, I called in a favor from Lana Cruz, a longtime friend and a sharp detective in the county's cybercrime unit. I briefed her without names and watched her face twist from confusion to horror in seconds. I didn't even have to ask. She volunteered to help. Together, we planned an audit trap. Lana would pose as a concerned resident needing a booster to improve her internet so she could attend her niece's remote classes. If Karen offered her a stolen county device or mentioned membership plans, we'd have all the legal ground we needed to launch an investigation. The plan unfolded the following weekend. Lana, dressed like a flustered ant with zero tech know-how, knocked on Karen's door holding a fake HOA flyer. I waited in a parked car nearby, watching through a bodycam feed. Karen greeted her with a suspicious glare, but warmed up when Lana said she was looking to buy into the network. That was the trigger word. Karen led her to the garage where multiple routers and boosters were laid out on a folding table like black market hardware. Some still had barcode stickers from government inventory. One even had a tag that read Storm Coordination Unit Level C. Karen pitched her best sales act, offering tiered access. She called it Neighborhood Signal Harmony. For $50 a month, she'd give basic access. For $200, priority bandwidth. Lana played her part perfectly, asking innocent questions, taking photos, and finally making a payment using marked bills. Karen handed her a box containing one of the stolen boosters and offered installation services for an extra fee. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen had gone from neighborhood nuisance to full-blown Wi-Fi cartel. Later that day, Lana and I met back at my place and logged the footage, timestamps, signal logs, and device IDs. It was enough to trigger a county-level investigation, but I wanted one more thing. Something that would tie the whole thing together with undeniable public proof. So I ran a synthetic emergency test through the legacy 911 backup protocol, simulating a heart attack response. The system should have instantly pinged both the nearest dispatch and emergency medical responder. But thanks to KarenNet, it took an additional 42 seconds. That could be the difference between life and death. That was the final nail. I prepped the files and sent them to the County Emergency Communications Oversight Board, filing it anonymously but requesting escalation due to high security risk. Within hours, a formal audit was scheduled. But before the county could even finish paperwork, Karen pulled the most Karen move possible. She decided to host a neighborhood movie night with her new HOA streaming network. The projector would run off her boosted signal. The entire neighborhood would be there, including local council members and first responders. If ever there was a moment to let the network fail publicly, it was now. So I waited, sitting on my porch sipping coffee while the projector flickered to life on the HOA lawn. Karen stood in front of the crowd with a microphone, praising her own innovation and calling the evening a community-powered digital milestone. I tapped a command on my laptop, and just like that, KarenNet collapsed. No warning. No recovery. The movie froze. Phones lost signal. Alexa speakers started repeating, "Network error." People grumbled and wandered back to their chairs. Karen panicked, sprinting to the booster box, unplugging wires and yelling about interference. And then, as if summoned by fate, Detective Cruz arrived with a clipboard and a smile. She approached Karen mid-meltdown, introduced herself as an investigator for the County Communications Division, and asked to see the source equipment. Karen stuttered. She tried to deflect. Then she blamed network trolls. Lana calmly asked her to produce receipts for the boosters being used. Karen snapped. She accused Lana of harassment, turned to the crowd, and shouted that she was being targeted for saving the neighborhood from corporate internet greed. That's when I walked in with the backup footage of the booster theft. I said nothing. I simply handed Lana the flash drive and watched Karen's face drain of color as she realized the crowd had fallen silent. No one was cheering now. All they could see was the blinking red light on the stolen equipment, the flickering projector frozen mid-frame, and Karen, suddenly alone in the spotlight she had created for herself. And I wasn't done. Not even close. Karen should have stopped when the projector froze and the crowd began to shift uncomfortably in their seat. That moment, when Detective Lana Cruz quietly but firmly asked to see receipts for the stolen booster, could have been her last off-ramp. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. No, she doubled down with the grace of a bull in a boutique, launching into a wild rant about government surveillance, claiming she was being framed because she offered free internet to the people. She painted herself as a revolutionary, a digital Robin Hood, ignoring the part where she stole emergency communications equipment and rerouted 911 data through a network named after herself. It might have been funny if it wasn't so dangerously unhinged. The HOA members who had once clapped for her stood back, clearly embarrassed. Even Terry, the HOA president who normally echoed every one of Karen's ideas like a trained parrot, was suddenly mute. He tried to intervene, offering her a chance to pause the event and maybe regroup in private. But Karen wasn't listening. She stormed over to the power box, yanked out cables, and started blaming the projector's failure on electromagnetic sabotage. Lana stood nearby, arms crossed, letting Karen's meltdown pile higher and higher. I watched from a short distance, keeping quiet, my presence enough to unnerve her further. By the next morning, the story had already spread. Neighborhood group chats were flooded with clips from the projector disaster. People were forwarding screenshots from Karenet's crash and laughing at her digital equity claims. But in the middle of the memes and mockery was something serious, a rising panic about whether their home systems had been exposed. One resident found his smart doorbell broadcasting to a public IP. Another claimed his Alexa responded with a stranger's grocery list. The fallout from Karen's Frankenstein network was growing faster than expected, and now people wanted answers. The very neighbors she once controlled with threats of fines and sidewalk citations were suddenly questioning her authority. And when Karen felt her control slipping, she didn't apologize, she escalated. That evening, she marched straight to my front porch with a folder in hand and a scowl sharp enough to cut steel. She didn't knock. She pounded. I opened the door, calm as ever, and greeted her like an old friend. She shoved the folder at my chest and accused me of orchestrating a cyber attack. She claimed my job as a 911 something or other was just a cover for sabotage. The folder was full of screenshots and printed emails, half of them from public domains, the rest clearly misunderstood tech readouts. One even had a circled diagram labeled, "Signal loops equals criminal spying." I held back a chuckle and asked her if she really wanted to go down this road. She said I'd messed with the wrong person, that she was filing an official HOA complaint and taking legal action for cyber entrapment. I thanked her for the update and offered her a seat, just to keep her talking while my internal cameras recorded the entire unhinged conversation. She refused, then accused me of using audio trickery to manipulate her voice, like I was running some secret sound lab in my garage. At this point, I realized Karen wasn't just grasping at straws, she was clutching invisible ones. She believed her delusions completely, and the more she talked, the more dangerous she sounded. The next day, I met with Lana at the County Operations Center. We reviewed the video, the packet logs, and the new neighbor complaints pouring in. Lana confirmed that the county was ready to escalate charges, especially after verifying that the second booster Karen had installed was listed as missing from a storm shelter's emergency deployment kit. That piece of hardware was supposed to help first responders coordinate during flooding disasters. Karen had it boosting her HOA newsletter upload. With formal charges incoming, Lana suggested we plan a sting that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind, neighbors, officials, and Karen herself. We arranged a controlled emergency dispatch test, routing a low-level distress signal through the area. If Karen's network intercepted it, The system would automatically log the IP hop and expose her setup as an interference node. We set the test for the following Thursday, when HOA leadership was holding a digital committee roundtable in the clubhouse. Karen would be there, grandstanding in front of her shrinking audience. And we'd have our proof. When Thursday arrived, everything went as planned. The test signal triggered at 7:03 p.m. Within seconds, it bounced off KarenNet, hit her router, and was rebroadcast to a neighbor's smart fridge before eventually landing, delayed and distorted, at the intended endpoint. The log was airtight. Meanwhile, Karen was inside the clubhouse, passing out flyers for her new initiative, Neighborhood Cyber Patrol. She wanted HOA members to report suspicious blinking devices, and advocated for a policy where she would inspect home networks for compliance. She was trying to spin her failure into authority again, the classic Karen pivot. Lana and a uniformed officer entered the clubhouse 10 minutes later. The moment Karen saw them, her speech stumbled. She tried to laugh it off, saying they were probably here for community outreach. Lana walked straight up to her and presented the log files. Karen's face turned to stone. She accused the police of falsifying data and claimed they were colluding with Big Internet. When asked to surrender the boosters, she said she needed a lawyer and then marched into the kitchen and tried to yank them out mid-event. The officer calmly stopped her and told her not to touch the equipment. She backed off, flustered and muttering something about constitutional Wi-Fi rights. As the evening dragged on, the HOA members slowly turned. One by one, they started asking questions. Why was emergency equipment on her wall? Why did the projector fail during her event? Why had so many people experienced outages after connecting to her network? Terry, who had once blindly supported her, stood up and declared he was suspending her from all tech-related HOA duties pending an independent review. Karen protested, called it an ambush, and then stormed out, shouting that she was being persecuted for being too advanced for this neighborhood. She didn't come out of her house for the next 2 days. Meanwhile, Lana submitted the full report to the county prosecutor. Theft of government property, public endangerment, tampering with emergency infrastructure, and digital fraud. Every charge was supported with timestamps, video, and network evidence. All that was left now was waiting for the official response. Karen, in her fortress of garden gnomes and pink flamingo boosters, had no idea how close she was to real consequences. I wasn't worried though. The system would catch up. It always does. And just as I thought we'd reached the peak of chaos, a strange new development landed in my lap. One of my flagged alerts lit up that night. Karen's network had gone back online. Not only that, but it was now broadcasting under a new SSID. Liberty Signal _. A scan of the packet flow revealed a new device attached. One I hadn't seen before. It wasn't hers. It was too advanced. Something military grade. Whatever Karen had plugged in now, it didn't come from a garage sale. When the alert lit up my console, I rubbed my eyes thinking it was a delayed ping or ghost signature. But the data was current, time-stamped within the last 5 minutes, and not only had Karen's rogue network come back online, it had come back stronger. The new SSID was unlike her usual flair. It didn't scream KarenNet or Wi-Fi Queen or any of the ego-stamped nonsense she usually named her devices. This one was labeled Liberty Signal _. And the signal strength was off the charts. I immediately traced the MAC address of the booster pushing the signal and felt a knot form in my stomach. The manufacturer ID didn't match anything consumer grade. This was military-level hardware, encrypted firmware, adaptive broadcasting, and anti-jamming features. I'd seen these before, but only inside secure command vehicles or deep in Federal Disaster Response Unit. There was no chance Karen bought this at a neighborhood estate sale. This was something someone loaned, or worse, someone sold to her without knowing what she would do with it. I ran a passive scan and detected that the signal was not only strong, it was penetrating across multiple frequency bands. Emergency channels, broadband, even a slice of satellite uplink. It was broadcasting like it belonged in a mobile command post, not in a suburban cul-de-sac behind a badly trimmed hedge and a garden gnome with googly eyes. I wasn't just concerned now, I was alarmed. If she had tapped into a federal node or somehow reactivated one of the storm units she'd stolen, the consequences could ripple well beyond the HOA. But I couldn't go knocking on her door and demanding answers. That would only send her spiraling further into paranoia, and if she really was in possession of high-grade tech, who knew what damage she could do trying to cover her tracks? Instead, I set up a silent watch. I isolated her network from mine and monitored Liberty Signal_X from a secure sandbox. Within hours, I watched data ping off her system, not just internally but bouncing between neighbor routers and even touching a school server on the other side of town. She had somehow set the booster to auto-link with surrounding open networks, creating a web of uncontrolled data relay. The irony was staggering. Karen, who once complained that my Wi-Fi booster violated neighborhood harmony, had effectively turned our block into a relay node for a rogue broadcast system. The neighbors had no idea their routers were now feeding into a rogue mesh grid. I compiled the logs and reached out to Lana again. We met at a quiet coffee shop, and I passed her the flash drive across the table without saying a word. She plugged it into her laptop, browsed the logs, and then sat back with a sigh that turned into a low laugh. Not the good kind, more like the disbelief kind. She leaned in and said, "You're telling me she somehow got her hands on a hardened communications booster? How is that even possible?" I told her I had no idea. The serial number had been wiped, the firmware locked, and the auto-pairing features suggested someone had either sold it to her on the black market or, far more terrifying, she found it abandoned and decided to plug it in without even knowing what it was. Lana didn't hesitate. She said she was going to elevate the report immediately to her federal contact. At this point, it was no longer a question of stolen HOA gear or broken community rules. This was unauthorized use of federal-grade infrastructure with potential national implications. If that device interfered with a real emergency system, satellite, FEMA, or military, it wouldn't be Karen who took the fall. It would be the entire county. The feds weren't going to send a polite letter or call a town hall meeting. They'd come in armored trucks and black SUVs, and it would not be pretty. By that evening, Karen had no idea the trap had fully closed around her. She was back on the HOA forum, smug as ever, posting about a new signal freedom movement and how people could opt in to her new mesh system to avoid paying corporate internet overlords. She made up some nonsense about digital independence and neighborhood resilience. It was the usual Karen delusion, wrapped in buzzwords she barely understood. But people were biting. A few neighbors even responded enthusiastically, saying they'd join the mesh if she could provide faster speeds. One even asked if she could stream sports through her new network. She replied with 3 thumbs-up emojis and a blurry photo of the Liberty Signal_X device glowing blue in her living room. The next morning, a white unmarked SUV rolled into the neighborhood. 2 agents in plain clothes exited and walked directly to Karen's door. I watched from my upstairs office window, sipping my coffee. They didn't flash badges yet. They knocked politely. Karen opened the door with that familiar sideways smile, wearing her usual windbreaker and HOA name tag, like she was ready to hand them a pamphlet about shrub height compliance. The conversation was calm at first. They gestured to her router, she said something animated with her arms, then she actually let them inside. That surprised me. Maybe she thought they were there to admire her setup. But 20 minutes later, she realized they weren't. Her voice carried through the open window, shrill and escalating. Words like unfair, conspiracy, personal invention. Then came the shouting. Accusations about hackers, people jealous of her ideas, threats of legal action. The agents stepped outside, now joined by 2 uniformed county officers. Lana arrived moments later, unmarked but purposeful. Karen came out last, waving a clipboard like it was a shield. She tried to push past the officers, ranting about her rights and how this was all retaliation for her innovation. The agents let her finish. Then one calmly reached into his pocket and presented an order, a federal seizure warrant. Karen froze. Her face twitched. She stared at the document, then at the officers, then at her garden gnome like it might offer an escape plan. They entered her home and began removing equipment. Not just the booster, but her entire network setup, routers, repeaters, external drives. She tried to film them on her phone, but one agent asked her to step aside, reminding her she was interfering with an active investigation. Karen's voice cracked as she threatened lawsuits, said she had friends in high places, and accused the officers of invading her sanctuary. The booster was packed into a shielded case, labeled and loaded into the SUV. And just like that, Liberty Signal_X was gone. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that evening. Karen didn't attend. Terry, red-faced and awkward, announced that she had been placed on indefinite suspension pending legal review. Some neighbors clapped. A few whispered. Most just sat stunned, processing the news. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The neighborhood was finally waking up. Karen's empire of lies had collapsed under the weight of its own absurdity. Later that night, I took a walk past her house. The windows were dark. The gnome was gone. But the neighborhood was quiet for the first time in months. No rogue signals. No interference. Just stillness. And yet, I couldn't shake one thought from my mind. That booster, it didn't just get here by accident. Someone, somewhere, put that kind of tech within her reach. And if Karen got her hands on one without knowing what it was, who else out there had something worse, and knew exactly how to use it? It had been a week since the federal team packed up the last of Karen's rogue network. The HOA clubhouse remained unusually quiet, almost unnervingly so. People weren't arguing over lawn paint shades or mailbox design code. They were whispering. The kind of whispering that comes after something implodes and no one knows whether to pretend it never happened or wait for the next explosion. Karen hadn't shown her face in public since the seizure. Her yard, once lined with yard signs, flamingos, and laminated HOA bulletins, looked barren. The solar lights she had illegally installed along the sidewalk now sat dark. Even her notoriously loud chihuahua, Biscuit, hadn't been heard yapping. It was like Karen had simply vanished, except for the occasional angry comment she left in obscure neighborhood forums under fake usernames that were barely disguised. But while the neighborhood drifted into a cautious peace, I couldn't afford to relax. As the 9/11 network coordinator, my mind stayed locked on one detail that still hadn't settled. That military-grade booster. The serial number had been wiped, but I knew what I saw. Its firmware had traces of a mesh propagation feature used exclusively by FEMA and certain military contractors. That meant someone either leaked the tech, dumped it where Karen could find it, or worse, gave it to her thinking she was some kind of grassroots beta tester. And even though she was loud, careless, and often delusional, Karen had stumbled into a serious piece of infrastructure. That wasn't just a Karen problem anymore. That was a system-wide vulnerability. I submitted a final report to my agency, detailed and exhaustive, cross-referencing timestamps with known device logs and packet structures. I added the test delay recordings, the packet corruption timestamps, and even the video of the projector meltdown. The file was thick enough to crash an outdated laptop. But I wasn't satisfied. There was still one loose thread I couldn't tug loose from my thoughts. The final 20 minutes of Liberty Signal_XS activity. Before the device was shut down, it had established a brief uplink connection to a node that wasn't in our state, or even nearby. That signal had gone east, touched a VPN exit node in Virginia, and then blinked out. I flagged it but couldn't trace further. Whoever was on the other end had masked their trail with professional-grade cloaking. This wasn't a curious teen or an amateur hacker. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had used Karen's ignorance as a smokescreen. Then, out of nowhere, Karen reemerged. Not in the HOA meeting. Not online. She showed up on my front porch. It was early evening, sun low, the shadows long. I opened the door expecting a postal package and found her standing there, arms crossed, holding a manila envelope. Her face wasn't angry this time. It was desperate. Her tone lacked the usual venom. It was low, like someone who had finally run out of energy to fight. She handed me the envelope and said, "You need to see what they left behind." I didn't invite her in. She didn't ask to be. She turned around and walked away, not even looking back. Inside the envelope were printed screenshots, logs, correspondence, and what appeared to be a partial user manual for the Liberty Signal_X booster. The manual wasn't from any government database. It looked like a draft, incomplete, some pages still marked with placeholders. But it confirmed what I suspected. The booster was part of a prototype communications grid designed to operate in disaster-prone zones without relying on existing cell towers. Karen, somehow, had been included in a pilot test, not by design, but because she clicked on an ad in some dark corner of the internet labeled Wi-Fi expansion kit for community leaders. She thought she was ordering a neighborhood mesh setup, but she had essentially bought stolen gear being dumped by a black market tech seller. The log showed that before Karen's network crashed, the system had activated an autolink test sequence meant to scan for nearby unsecured node. In its final run, it had detected over 500 unprotected routers across the county and had automatically linked with 76 of them. 76 homes, offices, and schools unknowingly became part of an unauthorized communications net that ran through Karen's living room. And the worst part? One of the screenshots showed that a backup of the booster's configuration had been uploaded remotely to an encrypted server labeled node_scatter24. I sent everything to Lana immediately. Within hours, she got back to me and confirmed that the booster's origin was under current federal investigation, part of a theft case involving unregistered military contractor devices that went missing during a prototype shipment transfer. Someone had hijacked a shipment, wiped the IDs, and pushed the tech onto black market channels disguised as civilian gear. Karen had just been the idiot who unboxed one first. But before law enforcement could move further, something else happened. The HOA issued a mass email announcing Karen's formal removal from the board. The vote had been unanimous. Terry, who had quietly distanced himself from her, had finally broken rank. The email was sterile and polite, thanking her for her service while explaining that due to recent complications, she would no longer be involved in communications, enforcement, or budgeting. She was effectively exiled. The neighborhood responded with relief. One resident brought donuts to the next HOA meeting. Another started planning a block party, just because. The mood shifted like a curtain being lifted. Kids rode bikes without being chased off for sidewalk violations. People waved to each other without worrying about fine notices appearing in their mailbox. The entire block felt lighter. But even as people moved on, I stayed alert. Because buried in that envelope Karen gave me was one more detail. A final scan page, barely legible, handwritten in scrawled ink across the top of a device schematic. Unit 6/14. Active prototype in field test. Awaiting auto beacon signal. No civilian disclosure permitted. That one line told me everything I needed to know. Karen hadn't just stumbled onto stolen tech. She'd accidentally activated something that was still being watched. Someone, somewhere, had been waiting to see what the device would do once deployed. And once Karen plugged it in, they had watched it, used it, maybe even pushed it. Whether Karen realized it or not, she had become part of someone else's experiment. And so had all of us. Lana pushed the case upward. Federal agencies moved to track the origin of the stolen gear. I offered to testify if needed. But Karen? She disappeared again. Her house went up for sale 2 weeks later. The listing called it a modern rustic gem with historical character. I didn't see her pack. I didn't see the moving truck. She just vanished. No goodbye, no final fight, not even a last scream about shrub height ordinances. But before she left, she taped one note to my door. Just a single torn page with messy handwriting. It read, "I thought I was doing something good. I didn't know they were watching. I never wanted it to go this far." I kept it. Not because I forgave her, but because it reminded me that even the loudest disasters can start from ignorance, not malice. She didn't understand the systems she tampered with. She only wanted attention, relevance, control. But she activated something far bigger than HOA disputes and parking citations. And though Karen was gone, I couldn't help but look at every Wi-Fi ping, every signal anomaly, every strange network ID with fresh suspicion. Because Liberty Signal_X may be offline, but the beacon it sent might still be blinking out there, waiting.